March 1945, the Pacific is burning. Japan stands cornered, its empire shrinking by the day. The thunder of American B-29 bombers echoes across the sky, turning cities into ruins. Yet, while the world watches the fire raining from above, another quieter storm is about to begin, one the Japanese never even saw coming. Thousands of miles from home, the U.S. Air Force prepares for an operation unlike any before. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with mines, silent killers designed to choke the arteries of an empire that lives on the sea. In the cover of night, massive B-29 Superfortresses sweep over the dark waters of Japan, dropping not explosives, but traps. Invisible, patient, deadly. By the time the empire realizes what's happening, it's too late. 12,000 mines have already sealed Japan's fate, crippling its supply lines and sinking over 670 ships without a single direct battle. It was an operation so devastating, yet so silent, that even decades later, many would never know its name. They called it Operation Starvation, and it changed the course of war without a single shot fired in anger. 1941. The rising sun dominates the Pacific. From the jungles of Burma to the islands of the Philippines, the Japanese empire stretches across thousands of miles of ocean. Its war machine seems unstoppable, powered by steel, oil, and determination. But beneath this vast military might lies a secret weakness. Japan's lifeline runs through the sea. Every tank, every bullet, every grain of rice depends on ships that must cross treacherous waters. As the war deepens, this silent dependency becomes the empire's greatest vulnerability, and America is about to exploit it in a way no one could have imagined. In the early years of World War II, Japan's empire seemed invincible. Its forces had swept through Asia with lightning speed, conquering Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Each victory brought new resources, new power, and new confidence. But that expansion came at a cost few in Tokyo fully understood. Japan's islands lacked the raw materials needed to sustain a long war. Iron, ore, oil, rubber, coal, all had to come from abroad. To feed its factories and fuel its navy, Japan relied on a vast web of merchant ships stretching from the coasts of Indochina to the home islands. These ships were the veins and arteries of the empire, carrying everything from soldiers and tanks to food and medicine. Without them, Japan would starve. By 1943, the Allied blockade had begun tightening its grip. American submarines, lurking beneath the waves, struck hard at Japanese convoys. Tankers burst into flames, cargo ships vanished into the deep, and yet, Japan kept fighting, believing it could endure. The Imperial Navy tried to protect its lifelines, deploying destroyers and escorts to shield merchant vessels. But the ocean was vast, and their numbers were few. Each month, Japan lost more tonnage than it could replace. Still, Tokyo refused to believe the sea could betray them. For centuries, Japan had been defined by the ocean, shaped by it, protected by it, sustained by it. To its leaders, the idea that the sea itself could turn against them seemed impossible. Meanwhile, in the United States, military planners were watching carefully. They knew that Japan's strength wasn't just in its soldiers or its aircraft carriers. It was in its supply lines. If those could be cut off, the empire would crumble from within. By late 1944, the tide of war had turned. The U.S. Navy ruled the Pacific. The skies belonged to the B-29 Superfortress, a flying giant capable of carrying tons of explosives over thousands of miles. Originally designed for bombing cities and factories, these aircraft represented America's unmatched industrial power. But not everyone believed in fire alone. Some strategists began to think differently, to strike not at the heart, but at the bloodstream of Japan's empire. One of them was Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Alongside him stood General Curtis LeMay, the fiery architect of America's air strategy. Together, they discussed a radical new idea. What if B-29s could be used not to bomb, but to mine? A mine, after all, didn't need to find its target. It only needed patience. Placed in the right shipping lanes, it could wait for days, even weeks, for an unsuspecting ship to pass. And then, in one instant, in its journey forever. The concept was bold but simple. And in early 1945, as Japan's defenses began to falter, the plan was approved. It would be called Operation Starvation, a campaign to choke Japan's lifelines until its war machine suffocated. No one in Tokyo could imagine that the weapon that would do the most damage in the final months of the war wouldn't be the atomic bomb. It would be a mine, lying silently in the dark. The stage was set. The Pacific Ocean, once Japan's greatest ally, was about to become its greatest enemy. January 1945, the Pacific War nears its end. American forces are closing in, Japan's empire is shrinking, and desperation grips the Imperial command. But while cities burn under waves of bombing, another plan is being born, a strategy as silent as it is deadly. In a war defined by fire and fury, this one would use patience and precision. Hidden behind closed doors, engineers and air commanders craft a new kind of attack, one that won't just strike Japan's cities, but strangle its very lifelines. This is the beginning of Operation Starvation, the war Japan never saw coming. By early 1945, America's dominance in the Pacific was undeniable. The U.S. Navy controlled the seas. The B-29 Superfortress ruled the skies. And yet, even with this power, Japan refused to surrender. Its armies still fought with fanatical resolve. Its factories still produced weapons. Its ports still received ships carrying oil, food, and ammunition, the last fragile arteries of a dying empire. To many in Washington, another year of war seemed inevitable. But a handful of planners saw a different path, one that didn't rely on endless bombing campaigns or costly invasions. They would cut Japan off from the world. The idea came from Rear Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of the U.S. submarine fleet. His boats had already sunk hundreds of Japanese ships, but the losses weren't enough. Convoys still slipped through the narrow straits and harbors of the home islands. To Lockwood, the answer was simple: mine the waters. But how? Submarines and destroyers could only cover limited areas. The Japanese coastline stretched for thousands of miles. To truly choke Japan, the operation had to be massive and fast. That's when the B-29 Superfortress entered the plan. Originally built for high-altitude bombing, the B-29 was one of the most advanced aircraft of the war. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, and enormous range. But to carry and drop mines instead of bombs, it needed a complete transformation. At the U.S. Army Air Force's headquarters, engineers began redesigning bomb racks to fit new weapons, the Mark 25 and Mark 26 naval mines. These were not ordinary explosives. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering, fitted with sensors to detect pressure, sound, or magnetic fields. Once dropped into the sea, they would arm themselves after a set delay and wait, unseen, unheard, until a ship passed too close. The operation's codename, Starvation, was blunt and grim. Its goal was to isolate Japan so completely that its industries would grind to a halt, its population would face shortages, and its war machine would collapse without an invasion. Leading the air campaign was General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 21st Bomber Command, based in the Mariana Islands. LeMay was known for his relentless firebombing raids on Tokyo, but he saw the mining operation as a way to strike Japan's economy with surgical precision. He assembled a team of elite pilots and crews who had survived countless missions over enemy territory. They would fly at night, low over the dark seas, into heavily defended areas where radar and searchlights hunted anything that moved. Their mission: drop mines near Japan's most vital shipping routes, ports, and straits. Every flight carried immense risk. Flying at low altitude made them vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire and night fighters. The weather over the Japanese coast was unpredictable, and navigation in total darkness was a deadly challenge. Yet, for the crews who volunteered, it was a mission worth the danger. In early March 1945, the first B-29s lifted off from Guam and Tinian under the cover of night. Their bomb bays, once loaded with incendiaries, now carried dozens of glittering mines. As they crossed the sea, the men inside felt the eerie calm of a mission unlike any before. No explosions, no firestorms, no direct enemy in sight. One by one, the planes reached Japan's coastline, the Shimonoseki Strait, the Kobe, Osaka harbors, and the inland sea, the arteries of the Empire's trade network. The crews released their payloads, watching the dark water swallow them whole. What followed was silence. No explosions, no flares, no destruction visible from above. Only the soft ripple of the ocean, and the knowledge that somewhere beneath the surface, thousands of invisible killers now waited. Within days, Japanese ships began to vanish. Tankers struck unseen objects and exploded in flames. Cargo vessels broke apart without warning. Panic spread among the sailors who once believed the seas were safe. The Empire's lifelines, the same routes that had carried its power across the Pacific, were being cut one by one. By April, the operation expanded. Hundreds of B-29s took part, laying thousands of mines across every major harbor and shipping lane around Japan. The scale was unprecedented, the largest aerial mining campaign in history. And it was working. Japanese shipping losses skyrocketed. Entire convoys were canceled. Supply routes to Korea and China were severed. Even naval warships hesitated to move. For the first time, the ocean, Japan's oldest ally, had turned against it. Operation Starvation had begun to strangle an empire built on the sea. April 1945, Japan's empire begins to suffocate. The ports are crowded with ships that no longer dare to sail. The lifelines that once fed an empire now run cold. Out at sea, sailors whisper of unseen weapons lurking beneath the waves. Mines that strike without warning, without mercy. Every ripple could be death. Every journey, a gamble against fate. And as American bombers continue to fly overhead, dropping more of these silent killers, Japan's war machine begins to crumble not in battle, but in hunger. The sea, once Japan's greatest strength, is slowly turning into its grave. By the spring of 1945, Operation Starvation was fully underway. Night after night, formations of B-29 Superfortresses soared across the dark Pacific, flying low through fog and enemy fire to release their deadly cargo. They no longer dropped bombs on cities. They mined the veins of an empire. The results were devastating. Within weeks, Japan's shipping routes were in chaos. The Shimonoseki Strait, one of the most vital waterways connecting the inland sea to the Pacific, became a death trap. Ships detonated in fiery explosions without ever seeing their enemy. No one in Japan could understand what was happening. Captains reported calm, seas one moment, and catastrophe the next. Some believed they had been attacked by submarines. Others thought new American torpedoes were to blame. In truth, it was the silent hand of aerial mining, an invisible blockade slowly choking the nation's lifeblood. Every mine laid by a B-29 was a waiting predator. Some were triggered by the sound of engines, others by the magnetic pull of a passing hull. They didn't chase ships, they simply waited, patient and deadly. Within a month, Japan lost more ships to mines than to submarines or aircraft. Oil tankers burned in harbors. Cargo ships vanished beneath the waves. Ferry routes between islands were abandoned. The effect rippled far beyond the coast. Factories in Osaka and Nagoya slowed to a halt. Coal from Hokkaido could no longer reach the power plants. Food shipments from Taiwan and Southeast Asia never arrived. The empire was starving, not from lack of courage, but from lack of supply. At first, Japanese naval engineers scrambled to counter the new threat. Minesweepers were dispatched across the home waters, their crews risking death with every mission. But the challenge was overwhelming. Each night, more mines appeared, laid by unseen bombers that slipped through the darkness and vanished before dawn. The seas grew so thick with explosives that no amount of sweeping could clear them. To the Japanese sailors, the ocean itself had turned against them. Every wave could hide a killer. Every sound from beneath the hull could be the last they ever heard. Reports began flooding into Tokyo. Merchant ships sunk near Kobe. Tanker lost in the inland sea. Convoy halted, mines suspected. The numbers told the story no one wanted to hear. In less than 2 months, Japan had lost over 100 ships, many of them vital cargo carriers. And the number would keep climbing. While the world attention focused on the firebombing of Tokyo and the coming invasion of Okinawa, few realized that Japan's collapse was already well underway. Not through battle, but through blockade. For the men flying the B-29s, the operation was both haunting and strangely quiet. Unlike bombing runs over cities, there was no fiery glow beneath them, no explosions lighting the sky. Only darkness and the soft hum of engines as they released their mines into the sea below. They knew that what they dropped would not explode immediately, that it might take days or weeks to find its victim. But they also knew the impact was immense. Every mine laid meant another ship would never reach its destination. By May 1945, the operation had become so successful that even Admiral Nimitz called it the most efficient aerial mining campaign in history. The U.S. military began expanding it rapidly, targeting every major port and harbor still under Japanese control, from Nagasaki and Sasebo to Niigata and Tokyo Bay. Each sortie brought Japan closer to paralysis. Fuel shortages crippled the Imperial Navy. Supply ships ran aground, unable to find safe passage. Civilians faced food rationing on an unprecedented scale. Factories that once built warplanes and ammunition stood idle, starved of raw materials. And yet, even as the nation began to collapse, Tokyo refused to surrender. Pride and desperation blinded its leaders. They still believed they could endure, even as the noose tightened with every passing day. But the truth was clear. Japan was no longer fighting a war against America. It was fighting against the ocean itself. By June, the mines had turned entire regions of the sea into deadly wastelands. More than 12,000 mines had been laid by over 1,500 sorties. Japan's merchant fleet, once numbering thousands of ships, was nearly annihilated. The silent siege was complete. Without a naval blockade, without an invasion, the empire's economic heart had stopped beating. The war was entering its final act, and Japan's defeat was already sealed beneath the waves. July 1945, Japan stands on the edge of collapse. The once mighty empire that swept across the Pacific now gasps for breath. Ships lie rusting in harbors. Factories stand silent. The skies above Tokyo burn, and beneath the waves, thousands of unseen mines wait patiently for their prey. In just a few months, the tides of war have shifted not with explosions, but with silence. Japan's defeat is no longer a question of if, only when. And as the world prepares for the final blow, the ocean that once carried Japan's dreams now carries the weight of its destruction. By the summer of 1945, the Japanese Empire was crumbling from within. Its once proud navy was shattered, its army scattered across distant islands, and its cities reduced to ashes by relentless bombing. But the real destruction came not from the skies, it came from the sea. Operation Starvation had achieved what no fleet, no army, and no bomb had ever done. It had cut the empire's arteries. The results were staggering. By July, Japan's merchant fleet, once numbering over 6 million tons of shipping, had been reduced to barely 1.5 million. In a nation dependent on imports for survival, that loss was fatal. Factories lacked raw materials. The railways stopped running. Power plants shut down for lack of coal. The once bustling ports of Kobe, Yokohama, and Nagasaki became graveyards of steel. Ships half-sunken, their hulls ripped apart by invisible explosions. Japan was being strangled, slowly and methodically, by the very ocean it had long believed would protect it. And yet, the true genius of Operation Starvation was not its destruction. It was its efficiency. A campaign that used only a fraction of the resources of traditional bombing had crippled an entire nation. Each B-29 mission could lay dozens of mines, covering vast stretches of sea in a single night. The Japanese response, meanwhile, was desperate and costly. Every mine demanded hours, sometimes days, of sweeping. Minesweepers risked everything, often becoming victims themselves. For every mine removed, 10 more appear the next night. The ocean had become a chessboard, and Japan was running out of moves. In some coastal towns, fishermen refused to sail. Merchant captains deserted their posts, terrified by the invisible menace lurking below. Civilian morale collapsed as food supplies dwindled and rationing intensified. The government issued strict orders to conserve everything, from rice and coal to electricity, but the truth was undeniable. The empire was starving. Even the military felt the sting. The once feared Imperial Navy could barely move. Fuel depots ran dry. Battleships remained anchored, unable to sail for fear of mines or lack of oil. Destroyers that tried to escort convoys often found themselves blown apart before reaching open water. In secret, Japan's naval command admitted that the B-29 mine campaign had done more damage than all previous air raids combined. For every ton of explosives dropped, Operation Starvation sank far more enemy shipping than any other campaign in history. The numbers tell a silent but chilling story. 12,000 mines laid. 670 ships sunk. Over 1 million tons of shipping destroyed. And all without a single major naval engagement. The Americans had turned science and strategy into a weapon of patience. Meanwhile, in the skies over the Pacific, the B-29 crews continued their missions. Night after night, they flew through storms and flak, guided only by radar and faith. Their bombs were no longer meant to burn cities. They were meant to strangle supply lines. Many pilots described a strange sense of calm during these missions. There was no immediate explosion, no visual destruction, only the endless black of the ocean and the knowledge that, days later, somewhere, their work would claim another victim. And beneath that calm lay a haunting truth. War was evolving. It was no longer just about firepower. It was about control. Control of air, control of sea, control of the unseen forces that sustained life itself. By August 1945, Japan's lifelines had been severed. Trains stopped running. Factories shut their gates. Even the military, once unstoppable, could no longer feed or fuel itself. The Japanese people were living on scraps. Cities teetered on the brink of famine. And while the atomic bombs would soon strike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many historians would later argue that the empire had already been broken, not by atomic fire, but by silent hunger. The great war machine that had conquered Asia was defeated not by an invasion, but by the sea. Operation Starvation had done its work. The empire had fallen, not with a roar, but with a whisper beneath the waves. August 1945, the world stands in stunned silence. The mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki have changed history forever. But as headlines scream of atomic power, another story fades quietly into obscurity. A story written not in fire, but in silence. While the world remembers the bomb, few recall the weapon that had already crippled Japan before those terrible days. A campaign so effective, so invisible, that even in victory, it was forgotten. This is the untold story of Operation Starvation, the victory that ended a war before the final blow was ever struck. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, the world believed it was the atomic bomb that forced the empire's hand. It was a convenient truth, clean, dramatic, and powerful. But beneath the surface of that story lay another, quieter reality. Japan had already been broken before the bombs fell. For months, the empire had been slowly suffocating. Its ports were sealed, its ships sunk, its fuel gone. Operation Starvation had turned the Pacific into a prison. The mines dropped by the B-29s had achieved what no invasion could. They had isolated Japan completely, cutting off its ability to fight, feed, or even function. The statistics are staggering. By August 1945, over 670 Japanese ships had been sunk amounting to more than 1 million tons of shipping lost. Rice, coal, and oil could no longer move between the islands. Cities like Osaka and Tokyo ran out of food. Factories stood idle. The Imperial Army, stranded in China and Southeast Asia, was left to starve in silence, unable to return home. Japan's leaders knew it. In secret war meetings, reports from the Ministry of Transport painted a grim picture. The nation's logistical network was dead. No amount of courage or sacrifice could change that. Even if the Americans had never dropped the atomic bombs, Japan would have faced collapse within months. Yet when the war ended, Operation Starvation was quietly overshadowed. The atomic bomb became the face of victory, the symbol of ultimate power. It was new, dramatic, and undeniable. A campaign of underwater mines, invisible to the camera and too complex to explain in headlines, couldn't compete for the world's attention. But military historians and strategists knew better. Behind the scenes, reports from the U.S. Navy and Air Force revealed just how decisive the mine campaign had been. For every ton of mines dropped, Operation Starvation achieved more damage than any other form of aerial bombing. It was, by every measure, the most efficient air campaign of the Pacific War. And yet, it remained almost forgotten. Even General Curtis LeMay, who oversaw the B-29 operations, admitted that had the campaign begun earlier, it might have ended the war months before Hiroshima. He once said, if we had started mining Japan a year earlier, the war would have been over a year sooner. But in the eyes of the world, the story of World War II had already been written, and there was no place in that story for invisible weapons and silent victories. Still, those who had flown the missions remembered. The men of the 313th Bomb Wing, who had guided their massive aircraft over the dark, stormy seas of Japan, spoke of the eerie quiet, the sense that their work was changing the war in ways they might never see. They had no dramatic explosions to film, no fiery cities to show, just the endless ocean and the knowledge that beneath its waves they were breaking an empire. In Japan, the effects lingered long after the surrender. When Allied forces occupied the country, they discovered the full extent of the devastation. Over 7,000 mines still lay active around Japan's harbors and straits. Even months after the surrender, Japanese ships continued to hit mines and sink. Mine clearance became one of the first major post-war tasks. Japanese naval personnel, once enemies of the United States, now worked alongside American crews to remove the deadly remnants of Operation Starvation. It would take years. By 1948, Japanese minesweepers had cleared thousands, but hundreds more would remain hidden for decades, a silent reminder of the invisible campaign that had ended the war. The operation's legacy would quietly influence military strategy for generations. Naval warfare had changed forever. No longer would victory depend solely on massive fleets or dogfights in the sky. It would also depend on control of logistics, on denying the enemy the ability to move or supply itself. In the Cold War era, military planners studied Operation Starvation closely. Its lessons became the blueprint for modern blockades, precision strikes, and naval containment strategies, from Korea to Vietnam, and even into modern conflicts where supply chains are the new front lines. Yet despite its historic impact, Operation Starvation remained a footnote, a victory without glory, a triumph without fame. For the Japanese people, it became part of a painful national memory. They had seen cities burn and soldiers fall, but starvation, quiet, unseen, relentless, left scars that would last for generations. Many survivors would later recall not the sound of bombers, but the silence of hunger, the emptiness of harbors, and the fear of the sea. History often remembers the loudest moments, the explosions, the speeches, the photographs. But sometimes it is the silent victories that truly change the world. And among them, none was quieter or more devastating than Operation Starvation. 1946. The guns have fallen silent, but the echoes remain. The Pacific is calm again, its waters glittering beneath a rising sun. Yet beneath that calm lies the wreckage of an empire and the unseen legacy of a campaign that few would ever know by name. While the world rebuilds, a question lingers like the tide. How could an invisible weapon, dropped in silence, bring an entire nation to its knees? This is not just the end of a war. It's the beginning of a new kind of warfare, one written not in fire, but in silence. In the aftermath of World War II, the world tried to move on. Nations rebuilt their cities, soldiers returned home, and humanity began to count the cost of its darkest years. But for those who knew the truth of Operation Starvation, the end of the war marked the beginning of a quiet reflection. The campaign had proven something extraordinary, that control of the seas could be won not with fleets of battleships, but with patience, intelligence, and precision. It was a transformation in warfare, a shift from brute force to strategic suffocation. The B-29 crews who had flown those long, lonely missions from Tinian and Saipan rarely spoke of their work afterward. There were no parades, no medals for the invisible victories. Many of them didn't even realize at the time how massive an impact their missions had made. For the Japanese, the mines remained long after the surrender, silent sentinels of a war that refused to end. Fishermen would still find them years later, corroded but deadly. Some coastal villages refused to return to the sea, haunted by memories of ships that had vanished without a sound. Operation Starvation had ended the war not through spectacle, but through inevitability. It showed that in modern warfare, starvation could be as powerful as fire. And yet, in the great archives of history, it became a whisper, overshadowed by the roar of the atomic age. The story of the bomb was simple, immediate, and unforgettable. The story of the mines was complex, quiet, and deeply human. But for those who look closer, Operation Starvation reveals a truth far greater than tactics or tonnage. It shows the immense cost of endurance and the devastating reach of human ingenuity. It teaches us that every weapon, no matter how silent, carries a price. The same brilliance that designed the mines that ended the war could one day create weapons capable of ending humanity itself. As the Cold War dawned, the lessons of Operation Starvation lived on, studied, adapted, and rewritten in new doctrines of containment and control. But beneath those technical manuals and strategy papers, there was something more profound, a warning. A warning that even the quietest victories can echo through generations. Today, the Pacific is peaceful again. The same waters that once hid death now carry trade, life, and connection. But beneath that surface lies a story the waves still remember. The story of 12,000 mines, 670 ships, and a nation brought to its knees by a weapon it never saw. Operation Starvation stands as one of the most efficient and most overlooked campaigns in military history. It demanded no massive armies, no invasions, no grand speeches. Just the endless patience of the sea and the silent courage of those who flew above it. In the end, history is not just about the battles we see. It's about the forces we feel. And perhaps that's the true legacy of Operation Starvation. A reminder that silence can be more powerful than sound, and that even in war, the quietest acts can shape the fate of nations. So the next time you see a calm sea, remember, beneath those peaceful waters once lay the weapons that ended an empire. Hit that like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories of history's turning points.